Hello, I'm Nathan. I'm a Latin 4 student, currently a senior, and this is my Latin final project. The goal of this project is to make something that you think would be helpful to Latin students. And I thought the most helpful thing to a Latin student, since I'm sure you guys are already quite smart anyways, would just be some words of encouragement, because personally for me, it felt quite overwhelming at first. Latin, totally new language, there's lots of vocab to learn, there's different uses for different words, and like the list goes on. There's all this new stuff, things I'd never heard of, declensions and conjugations, and I felt very overwhelmed, and I didn't know if I wanted to stick with it for a good bit there. However, now looking back on it, I can definitely say that it was worth it. And if I had to go back again and sign up for a language, I would 100%, like in a heartbeat, sign up for Latin again. Like that is the language I would choose, and I just want to say why and how it's helped me and how I was able to stick with it and how sticking with it paid off. Uh, so firstly, like I promise it is not too bad if you do stick with it. Like really all there is to do can mostly be broken down, like some oversimplification here, but it can mostly be broken down into just understanding verbs, nouns, and adjectives, just like English, for a word level. And on the word level, thinking about verbs, you'd have to understand their person, number, tense, mood, and voice. Person and number, I'm sure you already know. First person pronouns are I or we, and that's for your numbers, singular, plural. And then second person is just you or you all, or you can do y'all for a singular and plural. And then again, like you and you all would be your person, and then singular, plural will be your number. And third person is just she, he, it for singular and they for plural. And that's all there is there. And then tense is something you'll have to add a little bit to your knowledge base here, but it's also something I'm sure you already know, which is just like past, present, or future. And then there's just some Latin caveats to that. And then voice is also not too bad. You just have to know active versus passive voice. And active would be me, the subject, saying words. I'm verbing. And passive would just be words said by me. See how that's passive? The subject isn't quite doing the subject isn't quite doing the verb. Said by me. Me is what would be the subject, but now it's said by me instead of just me saying. That's active versus passive. And that's all there is with voice. And then mood, indicative, infinitive, you'll know early on. Indicative would just be, like you can just think about normal verbs, and just almost anytime you're using a verb and there's not some special use going on, it's indicative. And then infinitive is just a to verb, to walk, to run, to make this video. That would be infinitive. And that's all you have to worry about until late Latin 3 or Latin 4, to be honest, and worry about the other mood later. And then nouns, a lot more simple with nouns. I kind of started with the big guns, but that's all there is to it, and that's one of the biggest parts of Latin. And then nouns, all there is, case and number. Nouns only need to be parsed on these two elements. Case, you'll learn nominative, genitive, dative, accusative, and ablative, and a couple others that are some like exception uses. But overall, that's only 5 cases, each with their own uses and scenarios for when you use them. But that's all there really is there. And then in terms of number, I think you know singular versus plural, so that's not too bad. And then adjectives, you just have case, number, and you add gender. And adjectives just match their nouns in all of these things, case, number, and gender. So adjectives are just like nouns, except they're describing them, as I'm sure you know, and that's the same in Latin. They just match. And so if you want to upgrade to sentences, that's really the bulk of it on a word level. And then upgrading to sentences, all you have to do is parse into clauses. A clause is anything with a subject and verb. Just break it down into like the pieces of a sentence that have a subject and verb, and then translate each of those. And like, that's not too bad. And that's how you stick with it. Why is sticking with it worth it? From my experience, and I'm not speaking for all people here, but this is just from my experience because I personally found it to be very worth it. Firstly, I did actually find, I know this is a motive for some people to take Latin. I did actually find it to be helpful. I did the ACT. with the grammar section, but I know SAT has a grammar section as well. And so, like that breaking into clauses thing that I said about translating on a sentence level will be that was very helpful for me on the ACT. Understanding clauses and being able to break a sentence into a clause, you need to be able to do that for understanding comma rules. So just saying like ACT grammar, like uh, I know like whether or not you care about those tests, like most people do take them, and so if you want a little bit of a leg up, it did help. Uh, and so if that was your motive, I would say yes, it helped. Not crazy, but it did help. And then derivatives, which are English words that derive or come from Latin words, can also occasionally be helpful. So yeah, that was nice. And then getting to more important things, like it's very good for helping with problem solving skills. Latin helped me think way more methodical. Like the word order of Latin sentences is not at all like an English word order. Like if you just translated each word, it would still be an out of order sentence. You got to put it together based off what's the subject, what's the verb, and what's maybe the objects. You kind of got to piece it together. You have all of the pieces, and then you have to make your puzzle. And this type of thinking is something that you're always practicing in Latin. Every time you translate, you're practicing this type of thinking. And so you get a lot better at it. And that translates to something like a hard chemistry problem where you're trying to figure out like you have all of these different variables, you have all this different information. How do you piece that information together? It's the same thinking that you do in Latin. It's just problem solving. And then if you're doing a complicated reading in English, you're going to be doing the same thing. So I thought that was very helpful for me as a skill to constantly practice and get significantly better at. And then finally, and this was it, for me, my most important reason was that you end up reading some very interesting stuff. I think once you do like learn how to read Latin and you start reading like Latin texts, you start to gain a very valuable understanding. And I think that the North Latin curriculum does a very good job of making sure that you understand the meaning of what you're reading and that you gain something from what you're reading. So this past year, we read Caesar and Pliny, Pliny the Younger. And when we did Caesar, we didn't just read Caesar, but we read Caesar. And Caesar's writing about like mass genocides, and his writing is a way of him justifying his terrible, terrible actions. And so we talked about his political strategies. We talked about his biases. We talked about where he might be lying and where he wasn't lying. And just in general, the political corruption that was going on with Caesar and how he was able to skillfully justify it without breaking laws. And we learned a lot in that. And we learned a lot that related to sort of corrupt politicians and things that corrupt politicians had done that I had learned the previous year in U.S. history. And this knowledge was very cool, but beyond that, it can be helpful. Like, you never know when some knowledge can help you. And for me, it ended up helping me in a college interview. When an interviewer sat me down, the first thing they asked about my resume was, hey, why do you take Latin? And so I explained, like, hey, like, you do actually learn a lot about politics and history in these readings. Turns out he was a history and government guy, and we talked for like 2 hours about this. Or it was like first hour was like all about Latin, and then second hour he was sort of like fighting for me, trying to help me get in, and was successful in that. Like I think that interview and having that knowledge coming from Latin was very helpful for me. And then for Pliny, we learned about the Mount Vesuvius eruption and how Pliny's uncle, Pliny the Elder, died trying to save people. And we keep exploring how Pliny, because that's his uncle, well, kind of, is very biased in the story, and how that's very important to understanding where Pliny might be stretching the truth and where some things he's saying might not be exactly as true, and how does he know these things? And thinking about bias when you're reading from any authors is a very important skill to have. And that's something that I hadn't practiced too much until I was taking Latin, but I think is very useful to do. Like, you have to be able to pinpoint where an author might be lying to benefit themselves or stretching the truth a little bit. And we did that a lot with Pliny's readings. And also just learning more about the Mount Vesuvius eruptions and what was going on and what it might have been like for somebody actually on the ground. Both interesting, and it's shown up for me. Like when I was doing my English final, it ended up relating to the stories. Like I was able to draw a nice connection there. So I mean, just knowing more about like history can always be helpful. And I'm a STEM guy saying that, so I just think it was very valuable. So my point is, if you do stick with it, you'll learn to read Latin. You'll get good at it. And then from there, knowing how to do that will be very worth it for understanding grammar. They can maybe help you on standardized tests, and just in general will help you. developing problem-solving skills, and learning some cool information, because who knows when or how that could end up helping you. So yeah, I definitely recommend Latin, and stick with it. That's my message.